Welcome to 20-0 Tactics with me, James The Loremaster Lammin, where you join me for another instalment in our 8-part series as we discuss the tactics for the 8 laws of battle magic from the core rulebook. Today we're going to be discussing the Law of Heavens, and I'm going to begin by outlining how this video will be structured. Firstly, we'll give you an overview of the Law of Heavens using our competitive rating system for the laws of magic. Now this can be found on the rating system page on triplecrownwargaming.com and is the same system that we use in our deep dive videos. Once we've established this, we will discuss getting the most out of the Law of Heavens on your wizards, and then finally we'll take a look at each of the armies which have access to the Law of Heavens, covering maximising the Law of Magic within that faction. So let's move on to take a look at the rating. Very much like when we looked at the Law of Beasts, you'll often find some Law of Heavens wizards hanging around at competitive events, particularly in that support caster role. The law is themed around astrology, searching the skies for the future and unleashing the raw power of the weather on your enemies. On the tabletop, this translates to a real mixed bag of spells. So let's take a brief look at each of the 7 spells and get this law's competitive rating. If you've not seen the system before, we'll give the law a score out of 24. Based on the following 6 criteria: the variety of spell types, the power and frequency of the law attribute, the average spell range, the spell flexibility, the average casting value, and the quality of the signature spell. So I'm going to begin, as ever, with the law attribute, Roiling Skies. If a spell from the Law of Heavens targets an enemy flying unit or model with the fly special rule, the target suffers d6 strength 4 hits, in addition to the spell's other effects. Now, the big positive with this attribute is that it can be triggered by almost every spell in the lore. Unfortunately, if I'm honest, that probably is the best of it. The hits only target flying units, which means it doesn't trigger that often, and the hits being a random number and only strength 4 means the vast majority of units that are affected, well, won't be that concerned. It's at its best with the damage spells from the lore, to try and plink off the last wounds on a flying target that has been struck by one of the more powerful damage spells available. But overall, it's difficult to make this attribute have a meaningful impact, I'm afraid. Okay, let's move on to the spells now, and we're going to begin with the signature spell, Ice Shard Blizzard. This one is a hex with a range of 24 inches and a casting value of 7+. The target unit suffers a -1 to hit modifier to both shooting and close combat attacks, and a -1 to its leadership. If the target shoots without ballistic skill like a cannon, the target must roll a 4+ on a d6 before firing, or the shot is lost. Finally, you can extend the range of this spell to 48 inches on a cast value of 10+. This is a great spell. Low cast value, very flexible against both shooting and combat heavy armies. Great synergy with units that are weak to artillery, like monsters for example, and being a signature spell, you can spam cast it across an enemy army. Spell number 1 now, Harmonic Convergence. The law's only augment spell is cast on a 6+ with a range of 24 inches. The target unit rerolls to hit, to wound, and armor save rolls of a 1. You can instead choose to have the spell target every friendly unit within 12 inches of the caster on a 12+. This is only the second spell we've looked at, and again, we're saying this is good with almost any type of army, although unlike the signature spell, to get the very most out of this, you ideally want units that don't reroll to hit by other means. You also probably want them to have a good strength value, and ideally to have a good armor save. In short, this pairs best with knight units, but is great with other builds too. Final point on this one is that it's the only spell that cannot trigger the lore attribute. Spell number 2 is Wind Blast. Our first magic missile is cast on a 7+ with a range of 24 inches again. The target unit is pushed d3 + 1 inches directly away from the caster. If they come into contact with impassable terrain, the unit stops and takes d6 strength 3 hits. Similarly, if they come into contact with another unit, again they stop, and both units this time take d6 strength 3 hits. Now you can boost this one too. To move the target further, they go d6 + 2 inches instead, and the cast value is increased to a 14+. Now, a spell that looks like it has potential for moving enemy units around. That's the first impression you get with this one. However, if I'm brutally honest, it never seems to really deliver the big effect. Best employed to prevent an enemy unit from charging, probably using the boosted version to achieve that, if I'm honest as well. The spell just tends to be one that gets swapped out for Ice Shard Blizzard, if I'm honest. And that might be why you don't see it in that competitive application as much, rather than it being necessarily very poor. So on to our final Hex spell now, Curse of the Midnight Wind. Another spell with a range of 24 inches, this one is cast on a 10+. The target unit must reroll to hit, to wound, and armor saves of a 6. The opposite effect of Harmonic Convergence, if you will. This one can also be boosted to hit all enemies within 12, but the cast does rocket to a 20+. Now, that boosted value is high, but this spell can really bring home the bacon. Unlike Harmonic Convergence, this one is probably best against slightly lower armoured, lower strength, and maybe poorer weapon skill targets. That armour could also have been reduced by sort of high strength attacks of your own, of course, so it's worth thinking about putting on units that you're going to hit with high strength attacks too. It combines incredibly well with Harmonic Convergence, as you can probably see, to really maximise the damage in a crucial combat. In short, you love to see it. We are racing through and we've reached spell number 4 now, Urannon's Thunderbolt. And I'm, maybe controversially, going to say that I think the very best of this lore is behind us. Our final magic missile, this one again has a range of 24 inches and a cast value of 10+. The target unit suffers D6 strength 6 hits. Like the other spells before it, this one can be boosted as well, to a 48 inch range and an increased casting value of 3, so 13+ this time. The great strength of this spell and obvious synergy with the lore attribute is often, if I'm honest, outweighed by the low number of hits it will cause. The casting value is reasonable but not small, and to be honest, it has the potential but is incredibly inconsistent. You're going to average 2 or 3 wounds most of the time per casting, and that's something that you really have to consider. Comet of Cassandora is spell number 5. Now, for this one, I'm not going to paraphrase, I'm going to read the wording very specifically out of the rulebook so that we don't have any confusion. This spell is cast upon a fixed point upon the tabletop. Place a suitable marker over the exact spot affected. A small coin is ideal for this. For as long as the spell lasts, the player rolls a d6 at the start of each of the player's following magic phase. On a score of 1 to 3, nothing happens, but place another marker on first. On a score of a 4 to 6, the comet strikes the spot. All units from either side that are within 2d6 inches are struck by the comet. Each unit struck by the comet takes 2d6 plus 1 hits for each marker on the comet. So let me rephrase that, sorry, because I've changed it slightly. They take 2d6 hits plus 1 hit for each marker on the comet, at a strength equal to 4 plus the number of markers on the comet. Once cast, the comet cannot be dispelled. The wizard can choose to cast the spell so that the comet starts with 2 counters on it rather than 1, and 2 counters are added each time the comet fails to land. If he does so, the casting value is increased to 24+. Okay, so this is a powerful control spell with incredible range, but it does have some issues, the obvious one being that it might not explode at all. The range of the comet's explosion is another problem because its radius is random, 2d6. Ideally, you want it to explode with a couple of counters on it, which means your opponent has some time to mitigate its effect, by moving away from it. It does a random number of hits as well, which against larger units will often not feel like enough. It hits your own models as well, so you need to try and keep your figures away from it as well, particularly if you're one of the more fragile armies with access to this lore. And finally, you can take saves against it. Now, it is worth pointing out on this one that armour's unlikely to be that useful because it will probably be a reasonable strength of sort of maybe 6 or 7 when it arrives. But crucially, magic resistance does work against this, so it doesn't function like a unit killer either. It's not all bad. Its best use is definitely to force your opponent to move away from the spot that you place it in. And with that unlimited range, that can really force an enemy away from a place they want to be. And I must say, it offers good synergy with the other buffs and hexes in the lore. You know, getting your opponent to reroll sixes to save, which is probably likely to be the only sort of armor save they're going to get, for example, against the comet. You know, there's some good options there. And it can hit a lot of flying units because it's a radius and trigger the lore attribute quite a bit. Boosting the comet to, he's very strong as well. It's worth pointing out that 24 to cast is a big ask though. Last up, our final spell is Chain Lightning. This is a direct damage spell with a range of 24 inches again, and is cast on a 15+. The target unit takes d6 strength 6 hits. After resolving this roll at a d6, on a roll of a 3+, you may choose another enemy unit within 6 inches of the initial target. They then take d6 strength 6 hits. Repeat the process until you fail to bounce the Chain Lightning, or you run out of possible targets to bounce to. Now, it is worth noting units can only be struck once per phase by the spell. So it's a pumped up Urannon's Thunderbolt, which means it suffers with the same drawbacks that Urannon's Thunderbolt had. And to make the most of its 15+ to cast, that high cast value, you really need to bounce it a couple of times, which requires good luck. If you're Max the Chieftain Hurley, you're probably not expecting to bounce very often. And your opponent also needs to keep plenty of viable targets within the 6-inch range. If they spread themselves 6¼ inches, Chain Lightning is far less effective than you want it to be. That's not to say it's all bad. We've all seen it decimate a Wood Elf Avoidance army with one cast. But in reality, it doesn't do nearly enough damage to justify its cast value most of the time for me. Like the other damage spells in the lore, it promises so much potential but doesn't deliver consistently enough. Okay, so we've seen that the Lore of Heavens has some powerful hexes and augments and packs a lot of damage potential, but that its output is, to be fair, a little inconsistent. So let's get the rating for this lore. It has a 2 for variety of spell types. It's drawn back by the fact that the vast majority of his damage is the same sort of strength and same sort of type of hits. It gets a 2 for the power and frequency of its lore attribute. It gets a 4 for its average spell range, unsurprisingly. A 2 for its spell flexibility, a 3 for its average casting value, which is very reasonable, and a 4 for the quality of its signature spell, which is stand out. This gives the lore a very fair 17 out of 24. So we've gone through the rating for the lore, now we need to look at getting the most out of the Lore of Heavens on your wizards. The lore analysis has shown us that the Lore of Heavens has outstanding spell range, and a top tier signature spell with a very reasonable casting value. This is what drives its rating, and now we're going to talk about the tactical tips you need to remember when using it in your games. This section will be divided into 3. The general tactics of using the Lore of Heavens, and then some specific considerations for the level of wizard that you have the Lore of Magic on. So that's maximising it on a level 4 wizard versus maximising its output on a level 2 wizard. In general, there are some things you're going to want to do when using this lore. First and foremost is that due to its lack of a real unit killer, you'll need to ensure your army has some real hammer units in it, or you have access to that type of spell from another spellcaster. Secondly, as I mentioned in the spell analysis, the Lore of Heavens performs probably at its very best with cavalry, specifically heavy cavalry. This is due to the fact that these types of units really synergise strongly with all of the augments and hexes. Ishard Blizzard's leadership debuff helps cavalry break steadfast units and makes the cavalry hit harder, ensuring they win combats. The last part is boosted massively by harmonic convergence, which allows the cavalry to reroll its armour saves of a 1. With the better armour of cavalry, this is fantastic. It also affects hits and wounds, which, when you're strength 5 or 6, like most heavy cavalry on the charge, rerolling 1s to wound in particular is very strong. Finally, you round this up with Curse of the Midnight Wind, which affects support cavalry in particular. The cavalry's high strength means most enemy saving throws will be in the high numbers, the 5s and 6s, to pass, so forcing them to reroll the 6s is incredible. However, the best element of this spell for cavalry is the re-rolling of 6s to wound for the enemy attacking them, which means that enemies will struggle to killing blow your cavalry, further preserving the armour save which you reroll 1s on if you've got the other spell off. Finally, this lore is so good with cavalry because the damage spells, particularly Wind Blast, Uranus Thunderbolt and Chain Lightning, are best employed to clear enemy chaff, which means your cavalry will be far less likely to be kited around the table or prevented from getting into their optimised targets. Thirdly, its biggest strength is its signature spell. So if you aren't running cavalry heavy, then taking the signature spell multiple times in your army is the way forward tactically with the Lore of Heavens. Crippling enemy shooting and combat hit rolls alike for a fantastic cast value. What's not to love about it? The final part of our general tactics section is this. Unlike other lores, wizard positioning is less crucial for the Lore of Heavens due to the fantastic spell ranges, but don't forget that in terms of harmonic convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind, you're going to want to think about it a bit more. If you choose to boost the cast value of these spells, they turn into bubble effects, rather than extending the range. As a result, it's worth keeping your Heavens Wizard relatively central to your battle line, so you always have the option to make a big impact with a bubbled version of those spells. Now let's take a look at the different tactics between a Lord level wizard and a Hero level wizard with the Lore of Heavens, or a level 4 and level 2 in general. So, with a level 4 wizard, your first consideration should always be the acquisition of Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind. This is because these are the two most consistent spells in the lore. Realistically then, you're looking at one of the damage spells, with the ideal choice being Chain Lightning against unit heavy armies, or Comet of Cassandora against defensive enemy forces. Your level 4 should be looking at those damage spells as control spells from a tactical point of view as well. That is to say, Chain Lightning's job is to clear as much enemy chaff and control pieces as possible, and the Comet's job is to drive the enemy army out of its formation and towards you. With a level 4, you'll want to be looking at the boosted cast values on some of those spells a lot more often, especially on Harmonic Convergence, because it's an incredible effect which only requires you to roll an 8+ on the dice with a level 4 to successfully cast. Finally, if you are going to go for that level 4 wizard on the Lore of Heavens, I think you should be going down the Cavalry Heavy build. If you aren't going to take Cavalry Heavy, then I'd be looking at Hero level wizards for this lore. So, let's take a look at the Hero wizard tactics for the Lore of Heavens. Well, I'm going to start by saying, there isn't really a hard and fast rule for wizard level here. You can go very competitively with Lore of Heavens wizards on level 1, or just as competitively on level 2. If you're looking at level 1s, then you're just looking to take the signature spell multiple times and using it to support your army broadly. This is great in a monster heavy army, where you can control multiple enemy artillery pieces and stack up minus to hit modifiers to protect your best combat units. If you go the other way and look at taking level 2 wizards, the tactics remain broadly the same as with the level 1s. However, you're also looking to grab Harmonic Convergence as a primary spell. It's got a low casting value, only a 6+, very easy for a level 2 wizard, and has a powerful impact. The boosted version is also not too high a cast value for a level 2 wizard, another fantastic reason to be trying to grab that one as a priority. Whichever way you go, support casters on the Lore of Heavens are, competitively speaking, very viable, especially if they're in support of a caster with access to unit killer spells or spells that synergise very well with Ice Shard Blizzard. So I'm going to move on now to the final section of our video, and we're going to look at the tactics of the Lore of Heavens specifically with respect to the armies that can take it. I'll take a brief look at each of the armies with overall things to remember when using the Lore of Heavens with them. This is, in effect, practical pointers for the tactics we've already discussed. High Elves. High Elves have access to core heavy cavalry in Silver Helms and special heavy cavalry with Dragon Princes of Kelador. So they can certainly do a great army build with a level 4 wizard on the Lore of Heavens. Supporting these elements with Frostheart Phoenixes, who gain great benefits from Ice Shard Blizzard, and White Lions, who get a fantastic bump from both Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind as well, certainly means if you stick to the generic advice we covered above, you'll be just fine. However, as we'll see with some of the other elf factions, you'll miss the unit killer spell, as many elite armies do, because, this lord doesn't have one. With that in mind, you'll likely be best to add level 1s or 2 wizards on the Law of Heavens to your standard high elf army list, rather than playing in to the level 4, using the signature spell to protect your monsters and hoping to grab a harmonic convergence for your white lions. Dark Elves. Dark Elves don't have access to heavy cavalry in their core slot, and also don't have quite such stellar monster choices. However, they certainly have some standout build options for the Law of Heavens. Like their high elf cousins, the Druchi will get far greater benefit from support casters on the Law of Heavens, and 2 level 2s will really sing for them in particular. Looking to get Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind as the primary spell choices, and then sticking with that signature for any other options. Pair this with rows of core Dark Shards, Dark Riders, Bolt Throwers, and even the lesser seen Scourge Runner Chariots to build a truly terrifying ranged threat to this army build. You can see it already, can't you? Those bubbling up those buffs and the impact it's going to have on the sheer output of that level of shooting. I'd support this further with some Doomfire Warlocks, a level 4 wizard on the Law of Dark Magic, and at least 1 large unit of Executioners. The Dark Magic from those other choices give you the more consistent damage spells you're missing, and the Executioners work perfectly with Harmonic Convergence and Curse for a terrifying combat threat. Wood Elves. So let's take a look at the Wood Elves now, and the first army that lacks the obvious cavalry options to maximise the Law of Heavens. As a result, I'd rule out the level 4 as a really competitive option for Wood Elves. However, like their dark kin before them, Wood Elf armies get some real mileage out of the support caster on the Law of Heavens. Again, I'd stretch to the level 2 wizards and be looking for Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind. However, I'd probably keep one of Wind Blast or Yoranna's Thunderbolt if you rolled it as well. These will help control or kill those units that your shooting will struggle more with. The Armour Piercing on your Azerai Longbows means Curse of the Midnight Wind has a real strong effect, and Harmonic Convergence on the Bubble cast really gets the most out of those banks of True Flight or Hagbane arrows. The latter is also great if you take some Way Watchers to get the most out of those no armour save shots. Combine this again with the Dark Magic Wizard Lord and some Wild Riders for countercharging with the Curse of the Midnight Wind, and you have a spiteful combination. Bretonnia. Leaving the elves behind, I'm going to look at Bretonian armies now. Bretonians can only take the Law of Heavens on a level 4 wizard, so that's got to be our tactical angle. However, if we look back at the general Law of Heavens tactics, we will see I could have been describing a standard Bretonian army list. To maximise the Law of Heavens on the Scions of Gilles, you'll want to remember to keep your Prophetess central to your battle line to make the most of those bubble effects from both Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind. Have multiple lances, and definitely include Grau Knights, as you'll want to charge multiple lances into the same enemy unit to make up for that lack of a unit killer. Once it is together, your optimised spell choices are Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind again, with Eyeshard Blizzard to help break Steadfast. The last spell is a real toss-up between 4, 5 or 6. The Comet of Cassandora is good to bring your enemy towards you and break up their battle line. The other two are amazing for clearing enemy chaff choices. A real issue for Bretonians. My final piece of advice would be to take the Ruby Ring of Ruin in your army, just to give you some extra chaff clearance to help make sure your lances arrive all at once at the crucial moment with the buffs on them. The Empire. Sticking with humans, and the story isn't that dissimilar to the previous faction, if I'm honest. Whilst the Empire can take Lords and Heroes on the Law of Heavens, their best build for this is still, in my opinion, to take the level 4. Fill that core section with Knights of the Inner Circle and support them with Demigryph Knights and Steam Tanks. Finally, I'd be looking at a Celestial Hurricanum, although not as the mount for your Wizard Lord, I must say. If you combine that with the general tactics that we looked at for Law of Heavens above, you will struggle to go far wrong. Where it gets a little more specific is with the Steam Tanks and the Hurricanum elements. The steam tanks benefit in the same way as the knights from harmonic convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind, but it also gets a huge bump from Ice Shard Blizzard. Steam tanks are hard to kill and artillery is especially good at damaging them, which thanks to Ice Shard Blizzard is 50% less likely to land a hit. The Hurricanum adds power dice to your list, but it also has a baked-in +1 to hit modifier. This is amazing with harmonic convergence, as it means you'll likely be re-rolling 50% of your missed hits. Huge. As I've said consistently now, your optimised spells for level 4 will still likely be harmonic convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind as your first choices, followed by Ice Shard Blizzard next. Your fourth choice should be whatever you think is the best for the matchup. I'd round this off as well with a pair of level 1 Fire Wizards, just for chaff clearance, and probably stretch to a Templar Grandmaster with a Rune Fang to add more punch from those Heaven spells. Lizardmen. On to the Lizardmen. Now, the Law of Heavens is one of the few battle magic laws you can take on a Skink Priest, and this is crucial as, if I'm honest, I don't rate the law that much on a Slam Mage Priest. Like when we talked about Law of Beasts, there's just too much opportunity cost, but on the level 1 Skink, it's really strong. Ancient Stegodons are a really great monster, but are very susceptible to artillery, something that makes taking Ice Shard Blizzard on your Skink Wizards really strong. It really helps them out quite clearly. It's also a great support for Bastillodons, another staple of competitive Lizardmen army lists. So we can see that the Skink Priests with the Law of Heavens drop right into a standard competitive Lizardman army. The law is even better as the low cast value means that these support casters are taking very few power dice from the pool, which leaves more for your Slan. Now, whilst I would take one level 1 Skink Priest like this, my second Skink Priest would most likely be a special character. Unlike the other factions we've discussed, Lizardmen have access to Teto Echo. This level 2 wizard is a Loremaster on the Law of Heavens, who allows your other wizards to reroll power dice rolls of a 1, and much more, quite frankly. If you're looking at Heaven's wizards on your Lizardmen, he should be front and centre of your mind. The Loremaster is an incredible special rule, a gold standard, if you will, and means you don't need to worry about spamming a lot of wizards to get a shot at the really great buff spells that you want. My final point here is that as Lizardmen do like to do battle on the centre line of the table, Comet of Cassandora is, for this reason, really strong for them. If only there was a way you could guarantee having it in your army. Ogre Kingdoms. Our final faction is the Ogre Kingdoms, and I think the Law of Heavens is a bit of an undermined gem on them. Now, in the general tactics section, I said that cavalry heavy armies pair best with a level 4 wizard on Heavens, and in general this is true, but I think ogres are the exception to this rule. A level 4 on the Law of Heavens really drops into a standard competitive ogre list well. Your wizard is likely to be in the middle of your battle line, so the boosted buffs will be easy to maximise. Iron Guts and Mournfang Cavalry both benefit from harmonic convergence to maximise their output, as they have the raw strength and number of attacks to really feel it. Both also benefit from the effects of Curse of Midnight Wind and Ice Shard Blizzard, the -1 to hit from Blizzard being particularly strong on the Iron Guts, and the -1 leadership from the same spell being probably slightly better off for the Mournfang. If you're looking to put the Law of Heavens into your Ogre army, then I think you also want to have a couple of units of Lead Belchers. For me, they're a must include, as they are the biggest winners from combining with Law of Heavens. All three of the spells we have just discussed are incredible for them, ensuring that they hit and wound more regularly, that the enemy fails more saves against that impressive -2 modifier to armour from their shooting, and the enemy is more likely to fail panic tests as well due to the leadership effect of Ice Shard Blizzard. With all of that established, those three spells would be my main choice, with probably the Comet as the final piece in the perfect set of spells for ogres, if you will, as it's a spell that will force your opponent to move towards you, helping your ogres get into the fray even sooner. You love to see it. To conclude, I'm sure you can see the potential that the Law of Heavens has to offer, and that its 17 out of 24 is a very fair assessment of this law, if applied with tactical nuance. As ever, please feel free to get in touch with us through our social media, or comment on the videos with your thoughts about the Law of Heavens, and head back to the Night of the Realm mustering ground to check out all of our other exclusive content. I'll see you all next time on 20-0 Tactics.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright? Do it for Warhammer!